You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show. And again, we are continuing the discussion from last night about the Mandalorian and Grogu. Last night, we basically talked about the confirmed cast members, how there was only 3 of them. Although one of our viewers actually said there was 4 of them. Did you ever get any additional confirmation on a 4th one?
No, I didn't. You would thought I looked it up, but I didn't.
I know, and I honestly, I forgot to do it too. That was a long shot. I'm like, well, maybe he did. I didn't think to do it. I should have. But so maybe there's a 4th cast member out there, but we definitely dealt with 3 of them. And tonight we're going to be dealing with the whole concept of the fact that this movie has pretty high stakes for Disney and Lucasfilm. I mean, they actually have a lot riding on the success of this one. And so, of course, Ted chimed in. He said, hey, guys, last night was fun. Let's do it again tonight. The Force is strong with you all. And, of course, David's here. He says, hello, gentlemen. It's Star Wars Day. So roll call has been taken.
Right.
And yeah, well, what's funny, and we were talking about this a little bit after the show yesterday, it's funny because sometimes we might have 1 or 2 regulars, and then we'll have some nights where it's a completely different set of people that are chatting. It's like we'll have it's almost like there's shifts going on or something. It's like, hey guys, I got to take tomorrow off. Could you get my shift? So
yeah, man. But we love having any of you guys show up. That's what we're here for.
Right? Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, this has been a cool thing. It's very interesting. We thought it was very interesting yesterday that there's only 3 confirmed.
And they're weird. They're like these really weird. I mean, Pedro Pascal, okay, that one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And again, we talked about how that was not necessarily obvious because there was talks that he might not return. But yeah, the other 2 though, the guy that plays Zeb and Steve, what's his name?
Steve Blum.
Yes. I don't know why I can't remember that.
Steve Blum, and then we have, of course, Sigourney Weaver is joining the cast. So I think that was just, like you said, Eric, it's a little odd and just an interesting grouping of people that we have to confirm. But I think Disney is really to the point of the show. This is a critical time, for Disney is in regards to a lot of different properties, because it's not just Star Wars, but it's also Marvel too.
Yeah.
But this is a Star Wars podcast, so we're going to try to keep it to Star Wars. However, Marvel sometimes is affected by those things. So because those are kind of like the 2 bigger properties that Disney owns. So and that's why. With this though, Jon Favreau, who's teamed up with Dave Filoni, who brought to us the Mandalorian. If you remember, Mandalorian was the first Disney Plus original program.
Yep.
That was launched when they launched Disney Plus. The Mandalorian was like the first, that's like the flagship show. So that it has a very, I guess you want to call it like a rich history, if you can say that. I mean, Disney Plus has only been around for a couple of years, but
right. Right. We're talking about it like it's some sort of legacy act or something,
right. But so far, it's kind of it has a special place in Disney's heart, undoubtedly. So we've had season 1 very successful, season 2 very successful, especially when everybody saw Luke Skywalker come in and wreck shop. Everybody went nuts after that. And then season 3 was good. It wasn't as good as 1 and 2, but it was a decent show. Since then, though, we've had some other shows that have been kind of connected to the Mandalorian, such as Book of Boba Fett, which we saw the return of Boba Fett in the Mandalorian. We saw, we also have the Ahsoka series, and we also have, is that it? Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian.
If you're talking about the post-Return of the Jedi stuff, then yeah,
the post-Return of the Jedi stuff. So those things are kind of interwoven into the whole Mandalorian thing because we know we saw Ahsoka pop up in Mandalorian kind of to teach Grogu some stuff and kind of find out a little bit about him. That's how we even found out his name. So now we're coming to this film that's supposed to come out May 22nd of 2020. Uh, is it 5 or 6?
I think it's 6, but
Just said
we should verify. If we don't, the comments will come in.
it.
We have enough subscribers now that we will get, people calling
26.
us out. It is
Yes,
26.
it
Okay.
is 26. So May 22nd of 2026 is when Mandalorian Grogu is supposed to debut into theaters. Now, what does this mean for tonight? The thing is that this has to work. This is the first return back to the screen since the Rise of Skywalker for Star Wars. We haven't seen the Star Wars film on screen on a big screen since the Rise of Skywalker. So this has to land with people because Eric, as you are always reminding us that Star Wars is a theatrical experience. This was brought to us in a theater. This is where people know it. This is where people feel comfortable. It's a film in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a saga, standalone. Star Wars really truly lives in the theaters, and it's only recently been on streaming networks. So, with that being said, this, like I said, it has to work because the everything after post Return of the Jedi, save the Force Awakens, that did okay, but the Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker completely turned the fan base on its head. And so now once again, we have been trying to reassure the fans. They've been trying to bring the fans back with different programs like Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Book of Boba Fett, and of course Mandalorian. Mandalorian being the more successful out of all those properties. So now we have to.
Except for maybe possibly Andor.
Oh yeah,
I know
Andor.
David
That's
probably
right.
doesn't want to hear that, but
Yes, Andor is
Andor
another good
Andor
one, right?
was, and it was also critically successful. Now, that's not to undermine your point, though, because The Mandalorian definitely was up there. It is the catalyst that allowed people to start subscribing to Disney Plus. So
Hmm.
certainly you do have a correlation there between basically the beginning of the television era of Star Wars and then the show, which of course kicked it off. But besides kicking it off, the other thing that it did was that it established the rules and the parameters and all that stuff about what Star Wars looks like on television. And it did so
Right.
successfully.
Yeah, in the Mandalorian. Now there's
Yes, in the Mandalorian. Right. That is a very important point to clarify. In the
yeah,
Mandalorian, and that's what I'm
Mandalorian.
talking about. I'm not
Right.
going
Yeah.
beyond that scope.
So this movie has to work. And here's for a couple of reasons. This is why people will be more excited, and it makes sense that Disney would do this. Mandalorian is the first show. Mandalorian is the most successful. Um, tons of merch has been sold from the Mandalorian. I mean, everybody was running around with Mandalorian helmets. Everybody's been talking about this is the way. I mean, it has quotable things in it. Um, of course, the love of Grogu. Before we found out his name is Baby Yoda. Fever was sweeping across America. Everyone was buying. I mean, I see girls now like wearing these little Baby Yoda or Grogu keychains, and like he's cute. Everyone loves Grogu. So it's from a marketing standpoint, it's done very well on all facets, right? So now we're going to have a film that has to deliver because if the flagship sinks, where do you go? Where's the confidence that fans are going to have in the Star Wars property? If the one thing that we've known is that Star Wars has always been successful in the theaters, which lately we've seen that has failed with the last two films that we saw. So now you're trying to bring back a show that's widely successful, and you're trying to bring that to the film. I mean, to the big screen. If that doesn't work, yeah, you might have to pull the plug on Star Wars.
Well, and I think more importantly too, I think going along with your point, right? Where do you go from there? Because
Hmm.
there's a couple of arguments you can make. And before we do that, I do want to get this in from David before I forget, because it's mildly topical, um, at least to this point of the discussion, right? Because we're actually talking about how the Mandalorian has to succeed, how it has to make its I guess, like, it has to progress to a theatrical property instead of just a television one. And he says they should have kept Gina. All the conservative Republicans would have come to the theaters to see her, which may or may not be true because, I mean, yeah, sure, because she is conservative and she's very outspoken. And of course, that's why she lost her job. I mean, the thing
Hmm.
that just blows my mind is if you look a lot of the things that Mark Hamill has posted over the last year or so, way worse, way more political, way crazier in a lot of ways than anything Gina did. But obviously, Disney leans a certain way, agreeing more with Mark probably than Gina, so they got rid of her. But more importantly, though, besides all the stuff that went down with her, it's the character. They really lost. I mean, don't forget, they had to nuke out an entire show because of that. She was supposed
Hmm.
to be the star of the Rangers of the New Republic. I think that's what it was called.
Yep. Yep.
And, that had to go because the character of Cara Dune was like the star of that show, basically. So it had a
Hmm.
lot of ramifications. And of course, you had the trio, really. I mean, even though the Mandalorian was sort of like a lone warrior kind of thing, and then of course he had Grogu, you still had Grief Karga and you had Cara Dune. Now, in the case of Grief Karga, Carl Weathers is passed. So,
Right.
unless you recast him, there's no Grief Karga. You got rid of Gina Carano, so now there's no Cara Dune, unless, again, you recast. So, you spent a couple of seasons nurturing this relationship between these three characters, and now two of them are gone.
Yeah.
So honestly, that can't be understated. I mean, that's a good point actually, is they might want to take a look at maybe, I don't know. I know she's got that whole lawsuit against Disney going on with Elon, and one of the things that she wants to do is get her job back.
Hmm.
So
I think that, I think they should. I mean, quite frankly, you know, listen, people's politics are their politics.
yeah.
It's one thing. Like I could see if she was bashing, a particular, or she was like doing hate speech or something against someone. Okay, fine. That I could understand that because you don't want that person representing your property.
Right.
Because it's Star Wars, Lucasfilm, Disney they are brands. So I understand that, and you have to always think of the brand first. Understood. If that were the case, that wasn't the case though. If she's just spewing her own political beliefs about stuff, I mean, she won. That's her freedom and right to do so. I mean, okay, so what? So does a million other people. Now you mentioned Mark Hamill. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like Mark Hamill's getting recasted every. It's not like he's reoccurring on a bunch of shows or
Well,
anything
and
like
the
that.
other thing, I mean, I guess the other side of that discussion too is you're talking about Luke Skywalker. I mean, you can't cancel him the same way you could cancel her just from a marketing
Mhm.
standpoint. I mean, he's one of the original guys. So
Yeah,
there is that. There is that.
but yeah, I mean, but bringing into and to David's point with Cara Dune because it's funny. In the article that I was reading about that this Mandalorian Grogu movie is really supposed to be New Republic centric. Like this is really supposed to focus on the New Republic.
Well, I would have to,
Yeah, well,
right?
yeah, well,
Because we were talking about that yesterday.
hmm
Like, what else is it going to be? Because again, remember one of the things you brought up yesterday was you couldn't understand why we didn't have any Bo-Katan, Moff Gideon, none of
hmm
that. And I said something to the effect, well, we can't really criticize them for that yet because we don't know what direction they're going to go.
right.
Well, that explains it. I mean, if it's more New Republic centric, it sort of takes you away from that story arc.
Well, not necessarily because I think they're still intertwined though, because especially with Gideon,
Well,
because
they
I mean,
are, but what I'm saying is like you can, it's sure that's the main thing.
mhm.
And I guess you're probably like, really, this guy is like out to take over the entire universe, but we're going to concentrate on this little skirmish with the Pikes or something. I mean, I
Yeah.
understand where you're coming from, but we also don't know how much time is passing between the events either.
Well, true, but I mean, we still have to look at like he's I want to say he's the big bad because obviously that's Thrawn.
Yeah.
However, and that's where I'm wondering, this is going to be very interesting to see how they do this film. Because what I don't want to happen is what they did with Rise of Skywalker. Because once again, Disney, from what I've been hearing, what they're trying to do is they're trying to close out some things between Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian while still kind of pushing this whole New Republic thing. What I don't want to happen is what they did with Rise of Skywalker, where they're rushing through everything and we don't really get a chance to really enjoy the presentation of what the story in which they're trying to present. So if they're not going to do a season 4 of Mandalorian, not like I said, this would be fine if this was a setup for a season 4, and then you flesh everything else out in season 4, like you set everything up, and then now season 4 hits, and cool, we tie everything up. But if you're tying everything all up in this one film, one, what does that mean for Ahsoka, which obviously has another season coming up? So you can't tie up too much because you still have a whole nother season of her that you got to explain. Where we left off, where you have Thrawn, and like I said, unless you tie everything up in that one season, or maybe because Ahsoka didn't do that well, maybe they're trying to tie it all up here. That could be an option.
Well, but I hear that there is going to be an Ahsoka season 2. I don't know. I don't know. I just I'm not even
That's what
gonna I'm not even gonna try. Well, I'll go there in a second. I mean, first David was like, I couldn't find any cast members. Sorry if this is redundant. Is there no cast at all yet? You gotta watch yesterday's show. We revealed the 3 cast. There's 3 cast members. Guy, I think it was Universal, said there was 4, or either that or it was
Mhm.
Sea Dart. It was one of the two. Said there was 4, but we've only found 3. So there
Shadrach,
is
Meshach, and Abednego. No.
yeah, exactly. It's like you have
No.
obviously Pedro Pascal, who is, the key guy. But again, like I said before, you have no idea how close it was to him not being in the show at all. So the fact that he's been confirmed is a big deal. And then of course you had Steve Blum, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. I finally got it right. Who plays Zeb, which is kind of a weird thing because he had this cameo in it was a Mandalorian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that is giving you a little bit of a clue about the whole New Republic spin on this thing, or at least the emphasis of the New Republic. And then you had Sigourney Weaver, who is coming into the Star Wars franchise, and we were speculating a little about what character, she might be playing. Voyager. Voyager writes in, he says, what's the painting behind Daryl? So when did I get that? I got that, I think, for probably one of our first offices. It's like a jazz scene. So it's like a jazz piano player and like a bass player, and it's got like this whole like sort of surreal jazz concert scene that I got a long time ago. But I love it. I think it's a fantastic painting. Obviously, right now it's kind of bathed in green again. That room's sort of a work in progress right now. Like really a work in progress. But we wanted to bring Daryl on site. The basement studio's not done quite yet. It's coming, but not yet. So, we'll see. Obviously, you're going to see tweaks to that room that Daryl's in right now all along until the basement's ready. Because again, I just got that room ready. So, but that's what that painting is. It was this really cool, because I like to get all canvas art. I don't really like to do posters, even frame ones anymore. I like to do all canvas stuff. And so I found that one. So that's what that is. But yeah, I mean, I think that in a way, this is an interesting thing given the fact that we don't really know the fate of season 4. That's the problem. The problem is we don't know if there's going to be a season 4 or this is supposed to take the place of season 4. Because if, like you said, if it takes the place and then they don't even do Ahsoka season 2, well, then you're right. Then we have problems because now you've got to tie up. It's not quite the same, really, as Rise of Skywalker because they had to tie up not just the story of that trilogy, but they had to basically put a button on the end of the entire franchise. But still, I mean, you do have a colossal amount of story you got to wrap up and tell, So you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. And to do that on a film that is so high stakes, that they have so much riding on, it's a dangerous game to play, really. It's kind of like you said, right? If this is a bridge, if this is like a season 3.5 type of a film, where they're just giving you a little bit of a middle piece, and then they're going to wrap it up into... See, that's how it makes sense, is then they do season 4 of The Mandalorian, and then they do season 2 of Ahsoka. But you almost have to do season 2 of Ahsoka, too. Not just because of a lot of the storylines or whatever, but just from where they're telling this story, right? Because they didn't really tell this Thrawn part of the story in The Mandalorian. They introduced it to us there.
Right.
But they're really telling the story in Ahsoka.
Right.
So, but the problem is it's such a huge and very weighty storyline that would affect anything going on in the universe. I mean, it would almost be akin to if when the Yuuzhan Vong novels were coming out. I remember, because again, there's like 22 books that came out in the whole Yuuzhan Vong story arc. And so that dominated the EU for a few years. But what was weird was that every once in a while, they would just come out with some other novel, just some random story or whatever. It's like, it didn't feel right. Because you got this really crazy galaxy-wide thing happening with the Yuuzhan Vong, that even if you wanted to take it from the standpoint of, well, you know what, this is going on in another part. No. The Yuuzhan Vong is going on in the other part. Like, it's going on everywhere. Like, there's no part of the galaxy that is untouched by this. So what they were forced to do, and in my opinion, this is part of the reason why Disney killed the EU and wanted to start over, was because you either had to tell stories that happened before the events of the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, or you had to tell stuff after, which got really crazy and convoluted. And you're going to have the same problem here with The Mandalorian. It's like, okay, Thrawn is now just making it into the core world. Well, what's he going to do? What's his end game? What's going on, right? I mean, you can't just... I mean, I guess you could maybe slot this film in while he's on his way. I don't know. I mean...
Yeah, or maybe he's... like I said, if they wanted to do it, like if they wanted to end it all, they could bring, Thrawn. Of course, Ezra's there. See, it could go where, all right, now the New Republic has to deal with Thrawn and Gideon. And so now Mando has to, find whoever he can, find, and they all kind of have to kind of work almost like an Avengers type thing where you kind of calling all the people that you need to deal with Ron. So now you bring in a Boba Fett. Now you bring in, you got Ahsoka, and you also have Sabine, and you have Ezra. So now you got all these people who are trying to fight Zeb. So now you're gonna try to have this one big major battle for the galaxy. And then it's like, okay, if you do that, that could be cool. I mean, just in talking that out, I mean, but it has to be done right, though.
Well, not only does that have to be done right, it would have made more sense if they had done season 4 of The Mandalorian, if they had done season 2 of Ahsoka, and then done that movie.
Exactly.
See, that's the
I agree.
problem. The problem is the timeline. The problem is because Disney's freaking out right now about, okay, we got to put Star Wars back in theaters again. And you have all these other projects that they're either in various stages of development or maybe a little bit production, or maybe they're just not sure. You know, it's kind of like, nah, I don't really know if any of these other films are strong enough to be the triumphant return. It's like, okay, Mandalorian Grogu is an obvious choice, like what we covered yesterday when we did the whole cast reveal. I mean, all three. I mean, I'm surprised nobody called me out on that for, the clickbaity title on that. But
there's still time. It's only been a day.
that is a good point. Right. It only has been out a day. But when we covered that, though, we were talking about that. We were talking about the fact that it's an obvious choice for them to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the property that is probably the most known, the most loved out of the Disney era anyway. Because you can't count Rogue One, because Rogue One takes place in between 3 and 4 again. Because remember, it's just like what we said yesterday. You have a couple of projects that take place between episodes 3 and 4, but that really doesn't have any bearing on it because it has to deal with the post-Return of the Jedi time period. So, that's the issue. All right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, let me just get some of these, because there's been quite a few chats that have come in. I want to give everybody their due, and Darth Maul's joining us now. Not the Darth Maul, but yeah, Darth Maul's back again. Much like the real Darth Maul, right? Never dies. All right, so Voyager says, if Luke and Leia show up in the movie, people will love that, in my opinion. I don't care if people consider it jangling keys. Well, and again, that could happen because obviously they're around. Look, that was another issue that The Mandalorian had to deal with even in its television run. It's like, you cannot address the Jedi coming back together and not have Luke somehow involved in this. We had many discussions about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, once you introduce a character like Grogu into the equation, now you've changed the landscape. And you kind of, and then the more you deal with him, we know his species is very powerful in the Force, and so we know this is post Return of the Jedi only after a few years, mind you. So now it's like, okay, well, where the heck is Luke then? Because we know he's around. Because not only for the expanded universe, we know at least from the sequel trilogy that he was around because obviously Kylo and everything else that happened. So you would think that him being Luke Skywalker and as powerfully, he's going to sense Grogu.
Mm-hmm.
So, which I love the fact that that's how they kind of played it. They put him on that stone and he was trying to, call out in the Force, and Luke obviously picked it up and came to see what was going on. So I love that aspect of it. And then we even got a little bit of watching Luke train Grogu, and for Grogu to make the choice of whether he wanted to be trained as a Jedi or did he wanted to be trained as a Mandalorian. Well, obviously we know Grogu's choice was, Mando. So I think that there's a lot of different things, and if they bring Luke and Leia, I mean, it would make sense because you're dealing with the New Republic on the political side. That's
Absolutely.
Leia all day. I mean,
exactly. You have Luke on the Jedi side, Leia on the New Republic side. I mean, you almost have to. But this goes into Voyager's next comment, though. She goes, "If Luke and Leia show up, I really hope it's recasted, not deep faked." I don't know.
That's the question.
That is the question. That
is the question. Now, to Eric, to your point you made earlier, you said we don't know how many years have gone by, how much time has gone by with these events for this Grogu movie.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if it picks up right up after the events of season 3 of Mandalorian. Is it a year later? Is it 2 years, 10? We don't know. So the front runner that everyone wants is Sebastian Stan. If they wanted to do Luke Skywalker, Sebastian Stan, for those of you who don't know, if you're familiar with the Marvel properties, he plays the Winter Soldier. Um, so that's who most people, even Mark Hamill, kind of endorsed him. So that was cool. Like, hey, yeah, I wouldn't mind Sebastian Stan playing a younger me. So, but Leia, I don't know who they would get to play Leia.
Well, I mean,
That would be
obviously
cool.
there's Billy Lord,
Yeah,
Carrie Fisher's
I mean,
daughter.
his
That's
daughter.
been Millie Bobby Brown's name has been mentioned a couple of times in a Leia recasting situation. There's a
There's some
couple of
names out
people.
there. I
There's
just
some
don't
names
know.
out there. I don't know how effective it would be. I mean, I understand what I was really hoping would happen, and this is why I wanted the Solo franchise to go on with Alden
Mhm.
Ehrenreich, was because they could have started to introduce the younger versions of the original characters, and now you can just use them, moving forward,
Mhm.
much like what they did with Ewan McGregor.
Right.
He played the younger Obi-Wan, well, now he's playing the old Obi-Wan.
Mhm.
I mean, it's getting to the point now where you actually associate Obi-Wan more as Ewan McGregor than you do Alec Guinness at this point.
Yeah.
And that could happen even with any other actors that they recast. Okay, so now David. Oh yeah, these chats are coming in. David's coming in. He's like, if Thrawn is in it, will they recast Blue Joe Biden? Also, do you all think it's a good idea to use the TV cast in the theatrical release? Some actors aren't good enough for movies. This is an interesting point because one of the things that happened and here comes the Star Trek reference that we all have to do, right? I don't think this
Mhm.
affected the original cast as much, but I remember the Next Generation cast because they spent like 7 years or something, or seven
Mhm.
seasons on television. And I remember, I think it was LeVar Burton that was giving an interview, and he was talking about how the director really had to get them to make broader movements because they were
Yeah.
so used to like the 4 by, because remember back then television was 4 by 3, it was basically a box. And so when they were shooting television, they had to keep the blocking for the actors very narrow.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, when they started to do the Star Trek The Next Generation films, the actors were still acting kind of like they were on television. It's like,
Yeah.
no, you got room. You can actually move. You could do this.
Right.
And so there is an argument to be made, but I think that that's less of an issue now because if you look at the guy that plays Thrawn, was Lars Mikkelsen.
Mhm.
I mean, he's had theatrical experience. Like a lot of actors that are on television now, it doesn't have that stigma like it used to, where movie actors used to look down on television actors. It's interchangeable. And then of
Well, I
course
think he.
you have streaming, which kind of bridges that too.
Well, I think he's more so referring to there's the acting ability, not so much like the blocking, but he's just talking about the way to deliver lines. There's their talent. The thing is with that though is like one, you don't want to bounce around like that. And then the other thing is like we still have to figure out. I think most of it is just directing. Now, again, this film is being directed by Filoni and Favreau, so I mean, you're going to have the continuity of the same people directing these actors.
Hmm.
So on one hand, it's like you already kind of have built-in chemistry in a way because you're just going from there to here. But and Favreau is more of a theatrical person than Filoni would be
Yeah.
because Favreau's background is film. Like that's where he lives. You know, for those of you who don't know by now, John Favreau's happy from Iron Man and Spider Man and all the other Marvel stuff. But he's also a acclaimed director. He did The Lion King. He did Jungle Book. Um, so and Filoni being you know he's a great storyteller, especially when it came to animation. So it's kind of like again, it's just a matter of this, and that's where I think that's going to be the bigger issue is can they? And maybe I think that might be the bigger problem. should Favreau and Filoni direct this film? That should be the question. Should
Well,
they keep
I don't
them more
necessarily.
on the television and put somebody else who's like really an actor's director on the scene to actually get what you need out of the characters?
Well, I think Favreau could do it. You know,
Hmm. Okay.
I
I
mean,
mean,
I just think, but this actually brings up another thing too, right? Because this is the first time that we've had Star Wars on television. Remember, The Mandalorian was, like
right.
we said earlier in the show, was the first thing. So this is a new problem. Do you keep, because you also have to look at, this happened with Marvel, and this happens especially with DC. You have the television DC universe, and then you have the movie universe.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the television Superman, you have the movie Superman. You got, the television Green Arrow, movie Green. I mean, they do keep that separation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not necessarily sure that would work in Star Wars because people get very attached to the characters. And so they would expect to see them
Mm-hmm.
because now that actor has been associated with that character. So it would be kind of weird for them. Not to mention, again, you have to remember that television and movies are interchangeable now.
Yeah.
Actors do both. Yeah, movies actors doing television, television actors doing movies. I don't necessarily think it's a big issue anymore because, and that's why I brought up the whole thing with Star Trek and all that, because you did have a different acting style for television than you did for movies, but you don't anymore. Because movies, television are basically theatrical mini films.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, like, here comes another reference, Cobra Kai. You got Daniel and Johnny, who their characters come from films,
Yep.
but now they're playing them more so on a television type situation. But they're still delivering. They're still being, because they just,
Right, like you don't get that vibe like, "Ooh, I'm watching a television version of Karate Kid." I mean, it feels like the movies did basically, other
but
than
they just know how to
structure.
act. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that too. All right, so Darth Maul's got like a gazillion ones. Says, "I heard Obi-Wan might be getting a season 2. I would be so down for that."
That's
Of
weird
course.
hearing coming from Darth Maul, but
It's like bit off topic, LOL. Yeah, really, that might be a conflict of interest.
yeah, right.
Basically, that's something, and I think I brought that up yesterday, actually, that Ewan McGregor is really lobbying for a season 2, and there's rumors that it's in development, and he wants to go in and wear the Clone Wars armor, and he wants more flashbacks with Hayden Christensen. That is
Mhm.
actually something that is gaining traction. I think it is a little bit beyond a rumor. I don't necessarily think that it's one of those things that you should just dismiss. Because
Mhm.
again, Ewan McGregor is one of the people that they haven't really confirmed it yet, but he's alluding to it. So, yeah, absolutely. I really hope that that's the case. Darth Maul goes on to say, "There was once a time when I wanted live action Thrawn to be played by Benedict Cumberbatch." Of course,
Yep.
in our whole
Yep.
list of Thrawn actors, which I think we had, what, 10? I think we did like a top 10
Yeah.
actors that could play.
Yep.
Cumberbatch, I think, was number 1. He might have
Seems
been
like
number 1 or 2.
He was definitely top 3.
He was definitely top 3. But that ship has already sailed, unfortunately. He goes on to say, "I could get behind Millie Bobby Brown as Leia for sure." Jon Favreau was also Foggy in the Daredevil movie. Never forget.
Yep.
Yep. And then finally says, "DC has put their movieverse at the forefront at the expense of shutting down their live-action TV universe." So yes, that's also true. But it's just a point that DC was keeping that separate. In fact, that's one of the reasons why Tom Welling never became Superman in the films. Because
Mhm.
that's what everybody wanted after Smallville went off the air. They wanted Michael Rosenbaum as Lex Luthor and then Tom Welling as Superman, which would have made perfect sense. They should have just
Yeah.
moved it
Kept it
right.
going.
Yep, kept it going theatrically. But they're like, "No, we want to keep the television and movie universes separate." And it's like, okay. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing that they should have done, but we'll see. David says Billy Lord and the Winter Soldier as Luke and Leia would be dope. The Winter Soldier can act better than Donald Glover. It's like
Here we go
a
with
big
this.
Lando. I know.
Here we go with this.
Billy
again.
has a look, but if they reboot, they should redo it all. And remember, I was that guy. Like I remember, I don't remember what we were talking about. Maybe it was when we were doing the What Is Star Wars and we were reviewing the films. But I remember saying, I mean, as much crap as I get for this sometimes, I would be up for them rebooting the original trilogy at this point. Because the problem with the original trilogy right now, I mean, look, they're brilliant films. Some of the best films made. I mean, the only thing that I would say is never put them out of print. You know, don't replace them, don't put them out of print, that kind of thing. But as long as you have those movies available to you, it makes more sense in order to patch up a lot of the plot holes, get some continuity back, because essentially everything is bottlenecked by what happened in the original trilogy and the limitations of the filmmaking at that time. So, yeah, I mean, it would make a little bit more sense because I use Harrison Ford as an example, right? You have Harrison Ford in the original trilogy, then you have Alden Ehrenreich, who was playing him before, and this is if they had continued on. And then if you had him, because a lot of people were speculating, well, you know, let's just put Han Solo in this post-Return of the Jedi thing. Okay, no brainer, we get Alden Ehrenreich to do it because he played the young Solo. Okay, put him in there. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. But the problem you have is you have Harrison Ford, then Alden Ehrenreich, and Harrison Ford again. Because he plays him in The Force Awakens. So it's a little jarring at times. I mean, we could get by it because we live with this franchise for decades. So we're keeping up with all this stuff. But you also have to look at it from the standpoint if you want this to be a timeless thing. Now, they did try to do that with the Wizard of Oz thing, with Oz the Great and Powerful. The idea behind that was they were gonna do a trilogy. And the third movie of the trilogy would have been a remake of The Wizard of Oz. So you had Oz the Great and Powerful, you're going to have another movie in the middle, and then The Wizard of Oz. And they would have used that cast to remake The Wizard of Oz. But Oz the Great and Powerful didn't do as well at the box office, so they basically jettisoned the idea. But you're almost looking at a similar situation.
I mean, if you redid the original trilogy, I mean, well, I guess outside of Anthony Daniels, I mean, you probably could still get him to do 3PO.
Oh, he's going to do 3PO till he's dead.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course.
And
but
I'm sure he's already made the AI deal.
But I mean, it's just there's some characters. Yeah, I mean, you could recast and do it. I mean, you already have a young Chewbacca now with Eunice. You already have a younger Lando with Donald Glover. You already have
Much to David's chagrin, yes.
right. You have Alden Ehrenreich. If you redo Leia, I guess you would have to do Billy Lord or Millie Bobby Brown or someone like that. Don't know who you would get to play. Well, who you would do for Luke because you still can't use Sebastian Stan because he's still too old for that version of Luke.
They could technically de-age him because it wouldn't be so severe. You know, it wouldn't be like turning a 70-year-old into a 30-year-old. Although they did a great job. Of course, that's because they had a lot of footage of Harrison Ford. But in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I mean, no matter where you land on that film, the de-aging was incredible on that.
Yeah, I mean, Ian McDiarmid might be a little bit difficult.
But you wouldn't necessarily have to do that either because, again, I'm
Well, he
only
wasn't
talking
in.
about remaking 4 through 6. He's now at the right age to play the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. Honestly, remember he was like 35 years old, and they had to put all the heavy makeup and all that stuff. You know, they could do that now, and he would. I mean, he'd be
Well, I mean, and it's
perfect.
not like, well, especially for his like an Empire, he was only a hologram. They could still just reuse the hologram that they had, and then in
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi, he really didn't do much anyway. He just walked down some steps or
Mm-hmm.
sat in a chair. So, I mean, yeah,
It's very age appropriate, actually.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I guess you could.
Yeah. So now David says, for example, the 1 and 2 reboot, X-Men did messed up the timeline. And it would have been better to just start over. I don't want to see Star Wars make the same mistake. And then Darth Maul comes back and says, X-Men didn't mess up the timeline, they rebooted the timeline. And then created a separate timeline. I mean, yeah, they did it similar to what J.J. Abrams did with his Star Trek reboot, where it became like you had the Prime universe, which was obviously with the original cast and pretty much the original franchise. And then you had this, like, I don't know, almost alternate thing going on. So you could do that because, look, one of the things that Star Wars has going for it, again, wherever you land on it, but you can use it, is the world between worlds. You know, that's how I said if you really wanted to just get rid of, like, if everybody was like, you know what, I really wish we could just redo 7 through 9. Just completely redo it. And I basically proposed 2 things. One, if you remake 4 through 6 with the younger actors, and then you go on and you make movies more or less chronological, right? You remake A New Hope through Return of the Jedi, and then, you know, you start to pick it up in that post-Return of the Jedi universe, and maybe you even lift a few stories from the expanded universe if you wanted, or you don't. You come up with original ones. But the point is, after, I don't know, 15, 20 years of making movies, you could just make new versions of 7 through 9 with that cast that you've had forever at this point. That's one option. The second option, it's the cheesier option probably, but you could do it, is you could just go, yeah, you know, the current 7 through 9 we have, yeah, that was a world between worlds thing. Here's what really happened. I mean, you could do that. Again, that's that's extreme, but you could do that.
The only thing with the world between worlds is that, I mean, you will definitely have to explain. Like, you almost have to have its own separate film to explain that whole.
Well, yes. I mean, considering the
Because
fact that we only know about it through, what was it, Rebels?
Rebels,
Yeah.
exactly. So, like, the fact they only got exposed to it through Rebels,
Well,
even
kind
when
of in
people.
Ahsoka, right? I
Well,
mean,
I was just about to bring that up. Like, even with Ahsoka, like, only people who understood Rebels understood what was going on. Like, because it's
that's,
not like they really
yeah.
explained it in Ahsoka. It is like, oh, she just was dreaming or something like that. But no, she was. But they didn't even, explain. At least not yet. Now maybe they'll do it in season 2 of Ahsoka. She might say, "Oh yeah, I saw my old master," and But that's what I'm saying. Like, you would almost have to create a whole scenario to establish the world between worlds. And then once again, it just seems like everybody's stuck in this whole weird, like everyone's doing this whole multiverse thing.
Well, this goes into David's next point. He said Star Wars needs a multiverse. Which I don't think he's aware of the world between worlds, because technically that is their
It is a
multiverse.
multiverse, yeah.
So they could just use the best actors like Anakin. I'd love to see a movie with the guy that played Anakin now. We played Anakin then.
Yeah.
Same
Hayden
guy.
Christensen.
Aiden
Yeah, same
Christensen.
guy.
Yeah, did the same thing. He goes on to say, Marvel did it to bring back the 3 Spider-Mans, and it was an amazing movie. So yeah, I mean, technically speaking, Star Wars has a multiverse. Now, it's not a fully fleshed out multiverse. It was basically introduced. We got a little bit of it in Ahsoka, but it's still, I mean, you bring up a really good point. Nobody really, I mean, outside of fans of Rebels and things like that, even a lot of casual Star Wars fans have no idea. If you brought up the world between worlds, they would look at you like
Yeah.
you're one of the aliens from Star Wars, actually.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying. It's just, and I hate the whole let's use a especially where there is no real precedence for it. Like again, it made sense in Marvel because when you got a guy named Doctor Strange whose sole thing is about time, yes, it makes sense. Of course he's, you know, just like when he in the end game when he was looking at all the different possibilities, he went forward in the future and it's like, yeah, there's only one scenario where we won. Okay, that makes sense. Even in for DC with the Flash. Okay, we've known that it's been in comics, so it's not like that hasn't been established yet. But this whole world between worlds thing is relatively new to Star Wars, and quite frankly, you guys have been screwing up all the other stories so far. That's I don't want them to start trying to add a world between worlds type thing, and you start screwing that stuff up too.
Well, that's why I said it would be the unpopular thing. And look, multiverse, that's a term that a lot of scientists have coined now to explain certain theoretical things that they're studying. In the
Hmm.
old days of superheroes and stuff, we just used to call them alternate universes,
Right.
right? And so that concept has actually been around in the comics for decades.
A while. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole alternate universe thing is not a new concept, but ever since people latched onto this whole conceptual multiverse thing, now Hollywood has started to lift that and said, okay, we'll use that now. And you're right. It seems like almost every franchise now has to come up with some version of a multiverse. And it really was shoehorned into Star Wars. I mean,
Yeah.
it really doesn't fit or belong. I mean, I guess you could make an argument for it because, I mean, after all, it is sci-fi fantasy. So certainly it would fit within at least the sci-fi portion of it. But I don't know. It just seemed a little weird.
Yeah,
I
because I mean, it changes the whole landscape of the Force and everything. I mean, granted, yes, I know people are asking for us to expand Star Wars and broaden it out and come up with new story. I mean, which in a way I'm not trying to be that guy that's such a traditionalist that I can't allow for evolution. But I just don't want it to become just some fad that everyone's just doing. It's no
well,
different than when everybody started doing the whole Matrix slow motion bullets.
mhm.
Well, like, okay, like every movie has to have that now. It's just like, okay, come up with something else that makes more sense and be like, and that's one of the things about Star Wars. Star Wars has always been the pioneer of innovation. They've always kind of done their own thing and created, and everyone copied off of them, not them biting off everyone else.
Well, I think the other thing you got to look at too is that one of the masterful things that Lucas did, and it's the reason why Star Wars has, at least thus far, we'll see, but it's remained timeless. And that's because he paints in broad strokes. He
Yeah.
doesn't get into the minutia of things. I mean, under Lucas, he didn't really explain the Force that much. It's only through Disney Star Wars that they're trying to over-explain that too. It's like when you start to try to get into the details of things, you lose a lot of what made, in this case, Star Wars what it was. And so, yeah, you can broaden it, but the problem is that they're trying to over-explain things, and you're going to risk losing the timelessness of it. That's the reason why it was timeless in the first place, was because you're bringing in themes that speak to multiple generations that have been around for a while, stood the test of time, and overly they weren't overly detailed, and they certainly didn't, it wasn't like a commentary of the times. Even when Lucas was trying to do that, it was all these allegories that were basically done in a way that could speak to, like when he wanted to address some of the Vietnam War thing. It's like, well, it's just kind of a war in general, it wasn't super specific. And I think that
Yeah.
that's the problem when you start bringing in this whole multiverse thing and you bring in the world between worlds. I think it just starts to lose some of that. And it goes to your point, really, where you're saying, okay, you don't want to be so close-minded. But again, I don't really think that that's an issue, and I'll tell you why. Because the one thing that I think the expanded universe, for the most part, sure, occasionally they jump the shark, so to speak, on a couple of things. But for the most part, I think the authors did a really good job of expanding the universe without compromising it. And that, if they just took a page, no pun intended, out of the expanded universe writers, I think that Star Wars could grow, and it could go beyond the Skywalker saga. It could go beyond a lot of the things that maybe people feel a little boxed in. Because I remember there was one of the filmmakers, I don't remember who it was, but they said something to the effect of, well, I'd like to do a Star Wars movie because I've been a fan, since birth, basically. But the problem is that there's just all these parameters and rules, and I don't want to be boxed in with a story that I want to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like I said, it's a hard, and that's why I've said it's hard to take something that's an original concept, like I said, from George Lucas, and then you're trying to do it without him because
Mm, that's true.
it's it you know the vision of it all, and that's ultimately where a lot of things are kind of lacking, is the vision and then the ability to tell the story.
But
And
again, though, I think but that's what the expanded universe writers did. Now, granted, yes, Lucas did have to approve the stories.
mhm,
Yes, there were times where he said, no, you can't have Yoda do this, or no, you can't have Luke do that.
mhm,
But it was rare. I mean, for the most part, Lucas just considered it all fan fiction anyway. He didn't really even care that much about it. Oh, sure, eventually he started lifting a little bit of it just to make the fans happy in the prequels. But I mean,
yeah.
for the most part, though, he was pretty much hands off. And yet, these guys expertly wrote these stories that perfectly expanded on Lucas's vision without compromising it. So why can't these people do it?
Well, well, here's the problem: they're stories, not movies.
Yeah, but a
The
lot of the problem is with the stories.
No, I get it, but that's what I'm saying. I think a lot of people, they have good stories, but when you try to translate them into film, it doesn't work. It's like they're trying to bring a story to a because in the book, like I said, you have all this time to kind of get into the minutia and explain and show motive and all this stuff, and you really get wrapped up in it. But in the film, you only have a very limited amount of time to get it in and get out of it. I think the problem is that they're not writing stories, much like, case in point, Filoni. Great storyteller in animation, but it's not the greatest director in film because it's a different thing. And I think that's where a lot of people are kind of running into some of the problems, is that sure, like the stories like Claudia Gray, phenomenal. And I think like those concepts, now if you want to take those concepts like we talked about all the time, Bloodline, what's the other one that we love? Lords of the Sith,
Hmm.
um, the Aftermath trilogy. Um, a lot of those books are phenomenal. Even Catalyst. We often talked about that. Catalyst. Phenomenal book. If they take those concepts and just put them into, but you just have to have someone who can really translate that into a film that it makes sense and it
But if
looks
you
good.
look at the sequel trilogy, a lot of the problem was the story. It wasn't the filmmaking. I mean, you got Ryan Johnson, you got J.J. Abrams. I mean, everybody admits that they're well-made films. The problem is that they just went off the rails with the characters, with the storyline, what they were trying to do. They were trying to
Yeah,
innovate more than anything else. And that's the thing. If what's funny about it is if you look at the expanded universe writers, okay, Zahn more or less, Timothy Zahn is the George Lucas of the expanded universe.
correct.
He established a bunch of these characters. that the rest of the writers then expounded on. And they very rarely had conversations. Sometimes they might. Sometimes if they wanted to do, a story or whatever, they might read some of the other books that were written around it. But for the most part, these guys were pretty self-governing. And
Mhm.
yet, they came up with stories that actually made sense, honored the legacy, brought it into a new realm. Whereas like these guys, you basically you can't even make a trilogy and have it make sense. It goes wildly in all these different directions. And again, we talked about it. It was a planning, and that you do have to have for movies.
Well, that's what I mean is when I'm referring to no different than Harrison Ford when he's like, okay, you can write this stuff, but you can't say it. And that's what I'm saying. Like them writing a story, just like we said, Colin Trevorrow. On paper, his script looked phenomenal. Now, whether it would have translated well on the screen, we don't know. And that's what I'm saying is that like some people can write really good content, but it's not good for film. Whereas somebody who can, I don't know, like you just have to have a good storyteller who, because with storytelling for film, it's not just the story itself, but it's also the pacing of which things happen. And you have to kind of consider that. You don't have to necessarily worry about pacing when you're writing a book.
That's not true. You do actually have to pace a book right. Now, granted, yeah, you could take 5 pages and describe a tree. I mean, that's basically true, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
all know those writers where you're like, really, dude, nothing. I'm like through 10 chapters, nothing's happened yet. But that aside, though, think about the stories between like what Zahn did and then what JJ and his crew did,
Mhm.
right? The stories that Zahn wrote for 7, 8, and 9, just the stories. Forget the filmmaking versus book and all that. If you just
Yeah,
look at the stories, the story was way better in Zahn's novels than it was in the movies that we got.
true.
So again, the problem is the stories. These authors know how to craft a good story that honors a legacy and yet brings it into a whole new realm. Whereas these filmmakers, even from a story perspective, don't seem to know how to do it. And what's really bizarre is that you even got Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote The Empire Strikes Back, involved, and even he messed it up.
Well, now, let me ask you this question. And I see your point. Do you think because they're authors, they have a natural ability to convey things like that? Because like somebody like JJ, don't get me wrong, I mean, he could tell stories and he's good at it, but I mean, he's a filmmaker kind of first versus an author. So it's like, and we see people who can do multiple things, but everyone's not Prince. What I mean when I say that is like everybody just can't pick up an instrument and play it flawlessly like that's their natural instrument. You know what I mean? Like some people are good, and some people are really great at writing a story, and there's you got people who are really great at doing film. So maybe we need to get a good person who can write great stories, and then get a person who's a great filmmaker, and then do that. Not have
Yes.
the filmmaker try to write the story and then shoot the film, and then
Well, because
you know
in
what I mean.
there is another part to this though, and this goes into a little bit of what you were talking about earlier, where look at Stephen King. Sometimes he doesn't like the adaptations that have been made of his books, right?
Hmm.
Now there were a couple of times where he went in and actually wrote the screenplay. Sometimes it was very good, sometimes not so much. It just didn't translate. So it's true when you adapt a book to a movie, you do have to change a little bit, right? Because you have more freedom. Now, I would say that that's less so now because of CGI, and that actually goes into David's next thing. He says, "How much CGI do you think they'll use in this movie, and do you think it'll be overused?" I
It depends on the
personally,
story and the
well,
characters.
you're right, but I would say probably not because one of the things that I think that a lot of the filmmakers in the Disney era have done correctly is
Hmm.
they've gone more for the practical effects.
Yeah.
They've wanted to go back to the days, the original trilogy. It was done in practical effects. They wanted to give it that feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think they're going to do an over-reliance on it in the films. They did that within the volume because of a budget thing. So
Yeah.
the television stuff, you can't count that because a lot of that was budget constraints. Not The Acolyte necessarily, because as we know, that had an insane
Like 80
budget.
million.
And we still wonder where that went, right? But for the
That's a
most
Hitman's
part, though,
pockets.
yeah. Well, in Andor was done practical locations, practical effects.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't actually think that they're going to overly rely on CGI in this one. But again, it more or less goes back to what you were saying, where it's like, well, it really depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell, what kind of characters you're bringing in. I mean, how much are you going to use Grogu? Because obviously Grogu would have to be CGI'd.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It really just depends on what they're going to do.
Yeah, man. It's going to be interesting.
Oh, it's definitely going to be interesting. I think that, one thing that we could say about any Star Wars related thing is it's definitely going to be interesting. But we'll, of course, keep an eye on this. We'll discuss with you guys any further developments that happen in this whole thing. I'm sure as it gets closer, who knows when we'll see a trailer. Probably at some point a year from now, I would imagine, is when we would start seeing some stuff.
Yeah, maybe a celebration or something.
Yeah, but I mean, and again, I don't know when they're going to actually release a full cast list to this thing, but that's probably one of the next. I mean, unless some earth-shattering thing happens with this movie, I would imagine the next big update that we would do to where we would actually do a show on it is pretty much, hey, the full cast list has been revealed, or maybe some plot points have been revealed, but, of course, the flip side of that is, if we find out that Filoni's been fired off of his own movie, or if some other like weird controversial thing happened, we might do that too.
Oh, one thing I can say though, I think I know the fourth person that
I think it was Universal. Yeah.
Universal said Babu Frick.
Oh yeah, that's right. They did mention him.
Yep, Babu Frick is going to be in.
But see, again, that's not a cast member. That's a character.
Know. I'm just being facetious.
I know, but it's true. But no, it is true. He is going to be in
true,
this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, this is going to be. That'll be a pretty fascinating thing. The other thing that we have to start thinking about, because it's October, is we have to start thinking about what are we going to do for our annual evening before Thanksgiving show.
Oh, yes.
Where we bring Dave Cosby on.
Yes.
We're going to have to start thinking about that too. But in the meantime, if you guys like this video and, you want to see more stuff like it, don't forget to hit that like button. Of course, hit the subscribe and the notification bell. So that way you guys will be notified every single time that we're on. Because again, sometimes our schedules are such that we can't always be on at 8 o'clock on Sunday and Monday. Like yesterday, we didn't come on till 8:30. So I admit, sometimes it could be a little crazy trying to follow our schedule. But if you hit the notification bell after you subscribe, you'll always be notified when we're going on live. So yeah, I think that's going to do it for this one. We don't really know what we're talking about next week yet, do we?
Star Wars, I think.
Well, I'm sure. I hope. Unless we get that entertainment show going. Then you really never know, right? Because it could be anything at that point. But yes, whatever it is, it will be Star Wars related. And you know how Star Wars is, Lucasfilm, Disney. I mean, anything can happen at any moment. So obviously we'll be ready to talk about it when it does. So until next week, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.